People like to eat. I learned that as a kid, spending at least one night a week in the church basement of Redlands First Baptist. Potlucks were a way of life for church-going folk. I bet a number of you have casserole or Tupperware dishes with your name taped or Sharpied on the bottom of the container. And if you forgot to return the last one, you have somebody else's name taped or Sharpied on the bottom of your container. Potlucks are a way of life for church people. My mom has been a church lady her whole life long. She learned her way around the kitchen at an early age when her parents, both working full-time and usually on the swing shift at Patton State Mental Hospital, relied on her to feed and clothe her brothers, to get them off to school, to get them home again, and to make sure they had something to eat. In her late teens, the Betty Crocker cookbook was the unofficial Bible, and the red and white checkered joy of cooking required reading for anyone intent on garnering a husband. My mom memorized them both, and according to family lore, won my father's heart through his stomach. It wasn't long before her two children wanted birthday cakes in the shape of sharks or princesses, so she studied layering and icing. She achieved cake decorating skills that made her the mistress of ceremonies for countless neighborhood fancy occasions. My favorite cake she ever made was a Snoopy holding a tennis racket, very 70s. In that era, Gourmet magazine was popular amongst white middle-class American housewives. And it was about that time that my father's company, based out of Richmond, Virginia, began to expect home entertainment as a part of the hospitality extended to out-of-town guests. My mother was never one to underestimate the power of a delicious pot roast, and so she rose to the occasion, too many times to count. Yes, a dinner invitation to the Rikerts was a thing of beauty. It still is. Although my parents are both now retired, it is still the case that everything important happens in my mother's kitchen or around her dinner table. That is until very recently. On February 20th, my mother called me. She caught me on my cell phone, and I was actually in a cooking store. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And she uttered those words a child never wants to hear. "Don't panic, dear. We're in the emergency room." My father was admitted for what would become an exhausting 4-week ordeal to heal from what was determined to be a very dangerous bacterial infection in his leg. As anyone who has ever endured any time in the hospital will empathize, it was an emotional roller coaster. One moment it looked like everything would be fine and we were filled with elation, only to be met the next moment with terrible news, everything having slipped sideways in an instant. This happened over and over and over again. My mother spent an average of 8 hours a day in the hospital at my father's side, most of the time just trying to track the ever-changing health situation and difficult to understand medical terms that kept flying around her, before finally collapsing in a heap at home each night. In my more than 50 years of living, I have never seen my mother avoid setting foot in her kitchen. I've never known her to eat takeout as many nights in a row, but such was the case during our month of crisis. Over bleary eyes one night, she looked longingly at her kitchen that was once and would again be her sanctuary. And then fixing her gaze on me, she said, "Honey, I just can't cook." I was pretty sure that if I ever heard those words out of my mother's mouth, the end of the world would not be far behind. I wasn't too far wrong. COVID-19 arrived in time to drive the fear of God even deeper into my family's psyche, with the first reported death in the state of California happening right upstairs from where my father was being treated at Sutter Hospital in Santa Rosa. Then the game began of deciding whether or not to visit, whether or not to risk it. To make matters worse, I got called up for federal jury duty. Here's what I found amazing. Just after the nation had been put on notice to refrain from gatherings of more than 50 and encouraged to stay 6 feet apart, over 100 potential jurors were crammed into a windowless room like sardines and asked to pass a microphone from hand to hand for hours without any efforts made to sanitize in between. So, if I come down with this virus, I plan to blame the federal government. Now, back to the kitchen. The Bible is obsessed with food. Psalm 34, "Oh, taste and see that God is good." Matthew, "Give us this day our daily bread." And again, "But he answered, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." 1 Corinthians tells us that whether we eat or drink, whatever we do, we are to do all for the glory of God. Thankfully, my dad came home this past weekend, and like magic, my mother had a meatloaf and mashed potatoes on the table faster than most people can look up a recipe for meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Rack of lamb and rice pilaf were on deck the next day. Now, only she and my dad can eat all this delicious food because they're on house quarantine. But I'm still glad my mom is back in the kitchen. I'm glad we're all back in our kitchens. Our very own Mayor, Logan Harvey, opened a conference call this past week by extolling the virtues of homemade soup. He said, "I just made a big old pot of soup. It feels so grounding and it's really delicious. Everyone should make soup." And he's totally right. Food is life. And it's no mistake that images for God often sound like invitations to break bread, or the way a marvelous spice tastes, or the saltiness of salt. You see, the presence of God is all that is good and nourishing in our one of the best ways I know to understand all that is sacred. It's the stuff of life. The leaven in the loaf, the manna in the desert. Next week, I'll likely talk about something of a headier nature, it being Palm Sunday and all, but this week I just wanted to share from my own experience. All is definitely not right with the world, but some things are better than they have been in a long time. I don't think I'll ever look at a grocery store clerk again without wanting to hug them just for coming to work. Yesterday, my whole family stopped to look out the window at a fat gray squirrel who had come for a drink of water in our pond. 10 days ago, nobody would have given that squirrel a second thought. And think about it, I know it's disappointing because we were all enjoying walking outside, but for the first time ever, there are too many people in parks. Some things are definitely right. One thing we all have to do is figure out how to pace ourselves emotionally. We all know that things are likely to get a whole lot worse before they get better. But we're in this together and finding ways to create meaningful connection. All in all, I think we're exhibiting an amazing amount of adaptability. But when it all feels like more than you can bear, try going to your kitchen. Start with a grilled cheese sandwich. Or make a big old pot of soup, and don't forget the cornbread. And hey, if there's enough to share, take some down to your neighbors. Then ring the doorbell and hide behind a bush. You gotta laugh, right? Dottie Abbott sent this poem to me, and I'd like to close with it. It's called All Things Pass by Lao Tzu. All things pass. A sunrise does not last all morning. All things pass. A cloudburst does not last all day. All things pass. Nor a sunset all night. All things pass. What always changes? Earth and sky, thunder, mountain, water, fire, lake. These change. And if these do not last, do man's visions last? Do man's illusions? Take things as they come. All things pass. See you next week.